Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. My name is Elijah. I'm here to recap our opening series. For all intents and purposes, we're feeling pretty good. I think the Orioles took 2 of 3. We showed off exactly what we were hoping we were getting in Corbin Burnes. Jesse talked to you about that the other day, so I won't rehash it, but Corbin Burnes is good at baseball, and that is the predominant thing that we need to say. We are excited to have him. He's great. He's great. That's it. We then, the next day, won 13-4. Also a good game. Grayson Rodriguez had a great start, and we lost 4-1 earlier today. Nothing wrong with that. Took 2 of 3 on the opening series. I think that we saw some really good things out of our starting pitching. We saw a tiny bit of bad things out of our starting pitching. That is something that is going to happen. You know, not every single game is going to be 6 innings of 1-run ball, contrary to what Grayson and Corbin Burnes would have you believe. So I guess I'll just start there. Grayson Rodriguez, threw a great game today, just gave up the 1 home run. Yesterday, just gave up the 1 home run. I think the only thing, before I get to the good stuff, the only thing that is a little bit of an interesting note and kind of a watch item for me is that home run was off of the cutter, which was notoriously a bad pitch for him before his demotion to AAA last year, and before he came back up and obviously went on an incredible run. But the cutter was something that many people pointed out was not quite up to par with the rest of his arsenal, and I was just kind of intrigued to see that we did throw it again. He didn't throw a ton of them. He only threw 7. It was his least used pitch. But there were 3 swings on it: the home run, a foul ball, and then also a 106-mile-an-hour single to Brandon Drury. So it still got hit pretty hard. Did not seem like it was really... there were some that were thrown effectively, and a couple that did contribute to strikeouts. They weren't the punch-out pitch, but it's just interesting to see him throwing that again. I was personally just a little curious, so I went and looked and kind of how it compared to the cutter he was throwing last year. It does seem like there is a bit of a change to it. He is throwing it about 2 miles an hour slower. Spin rate is up a tiny bit. It is dropping about 8.5 inches more than the one last year and has added a tiny bit of horizontal movement. All in all, I think the thing to say is that he's going for a little bit more of kind of a almost, it's not a full slider, but it's more akin to a gyro slider with a tiny bit of cut than it was to the more more hoppy and less horizontal cutter that he was throwing last year. It's a little bit slower, so it is going to have a larger change in velocity relative to his fastball. But even then, we're talking from somewhere on the order of 8 miles an hour to 10 miles an hour. So I don't think that that's really really too much of a watch item in the change of speed there. It's just kind of an interesting note that he did make this change. For whatever reason, they think that separation might help him out a tiny bit. I'm intrigued to see where it goes. But today, obviously, again, 2 hard hit balls, one of which was the only damage actually put up against him in the home run. So we'll see where that goes. I'm curious, how they tweak that throughout the year. Another quick note on pitch usage, we did not see the sinker that he was supposedly working on this year. Fastball did have a lot of horizontal run. So I guess there is a chance that he, wanted to add a tiny bit of horizontal movement on the fastball, but on the 4-seam, that is. But I don't think that there was any real lacking there last year. Once he came back up, the fastball shape was perfect. So there is a chance there is a secondary sinker pitch that he is going to work into the mix eventually. Going from a 4-pitch repertoire to 5 is still within the realm of normalcy for a starting pitcher. But all of that said, Grayson looked really good today. I think the thing that we have to talk about first is just his changeup. This is a pitch that he dominated with last year, that we saw we were blown away by it. I guess I'm already at a loss for words, of course. But Grayson, his changeup is kind of the bread and butter. We saw toward the end of last year that playing off the fastball was, I mean, brutal to left and right-handed hitters. I think it's always fascinating that the same-handed changeup, right on right or left and left, is kind of an underutilized out pitch, I think, in baseball. So to see somebody who is truly a changeup artist in the way that Johan Santana was back in the day, and that's probably too lofty for me to compare Grayson to Johan Santana right off the bat, but just to say Santana would throw that changeup to any handed hitter. And it's cool to see Grayson operating in the same way. He uses it as a power pitch. He uses it as an attacking pitch, much less so than, I'm going to dance off the outside corner of the plate and I'm only going to throw it when it's moving away from the hitter. That is just very simply not the way that he uses his changeup. And I think that's really fun. It's a different flavor than we typically see in today's game, but his changeup is so good that he can do that. And clearly he's got good success. This was just me counting as I went back and watched some video from today, but I saw 4 of the 9 strikeouts he had ended on the changeup. He threw 23 of them. There were 15 swings on it and 9 whiffs. So 9 out of 15, 60% whiff rate. Only 3 changeups were put in play, again, out of the 23 that he threw. And I should also note, only 4 of these were balls. So it is not like he was just throwing them off the plate. Only 4 of these were balls. Only 3 changeups were put in play. A ground out from Anthony Rendon in the first inning, a ground ball double play in the second inning, and a ground ball back to Grayson. Let me take that again. A ground ball back to Grayson from Zach Neto in the fifth inning. So, 3 weak contact. All of them were below 85 miles an hour, if I remember correctly. Weak exit velos, lots of whiffs. And I guess the only other thing to say about the changeup is the Aaron Hicks at bat in the third. It's a 6-pitch at bat. He saw 4 changeups. Grayson gets strike 1, falls behind 3-1, and then throws 2 of the most obscene changeups. And they really were just middle. I mean, but they look so like, this high velo fastball coming up high and in. And one of the 3 balls was Grayson showing the fastball. And Hicks, I mean, looked completely ridiculous on both of them. And, he had a tough weekend as a whole. So I think he probably it was not the happiest homecoming to Baltimore for him. But all the best to Aaron Hicks, of course. So yeah, Grayson, he sat 97 with the 4-seam. Velocity was right there where you'd want it to be. Topped out at 99, if I remember correctly. Also had a 60% whiff rate on his curveball, his 3rd most used pitch of the day. There was only 1 ball in play there, although that one was hit hard, I will say. It was the Miguel Sano line drive. Ramon Urias made a really nice play, kind of spearing it down to his backhand down the left field line. But I mentioned that 60% whiff rate. I think it's worth giving a reference, on the day. Small sample size, caveat, disclaimer. But on the day, Grayson had 2 pitches with that 60% whiff rate. Of pitches thrown 100 times last year, so just windowing out, people who threw 18 pitches. Of pitches thrown 100 times, only Felix's splitter had a 60% whiff rate or greater last year, and it was 60.2. So that is really, really an elite whiff rate. I do not expect Grayson to have multiple pitches with 60% whiff rates. That's not how baseball works. But it's just to say he looked really good, and his 2 primary secondary. That's a weird way to say that. His top 2 secondary offerings. His top 2 secondary offerings were both just dancing in this really special way. And, we could talk about the merits of the Angels lineup. The lineup is not supposed to be the problem. It's the pitching staff that gave up 11 and 13 runs in the first 2 games of this series. So I think that, when we go ahead and we say, you're getting a lineup with Rendon, Mike Trout, Sean Will has currently the 3rd longest on base streak for any person or any player ever to start their major league career. He's not a bad hitter. Zach Neto is not a bad hitter. Taylor Ward clearly did some damage to us. So going through this lineup and, like working multiple pitches with these high whiff rates is a very good sign. And you have to be excited for Grayson, particularly, him and Corbin Burnes. The duo cannot really be separated. Those two are going to be so dominant at the top of the rotation this year. And you have to be excited for it. I guess one little note before I get off of Grayson is he did say that Corbin Burnes was giving him a hard time in the dugout because Burnes had 11 strikeouts and Grayson only got 9. So, I think there's that competitive edge that'll be really fun, particularly for, a young guy having one of the most established veterans in the game on the pitching side, calling you out in particular and saying, what happened? You can do a little bit better than that. I know you can, I think that's very exciting. And I love to see, that competitive edge. I think Corbin Burnes is one of, we talked about it from the standpoint of Bradish and Kramer during the offseason. Kramer already admitted to having modeled some parts of his game off of Burnes. I talked about Bradish with how, how good he is in supinating, creating action on cutters and sliders and curveballs, how very alike that is to Burnes. I think in a lot of ways, Corbin Burnes is great for this team, but that competitive edge and, really pushing people to be intentional about the way they're going about their business and to never settle for 6 innings and 1 run. Just saying you can do better. I think that's great. So the next pitcher today, Tyler Wells. This one's not as much good news. We did lose 4-1 today. He gave up the 4. But as I was, putting this outline together and kind of thinking back through, it really it was a tale of 2 Tylers. And I chuckled when I wrote that because I was like, our Tyler should be recording this episode. It'd be a tale of 2 Tylers told by Tyler. But in the first 2 innings, Wells gave up all 5 of the hits he allowed, all 4 of the runs, only 3 were earned. In general, all of the badness of his start was contained within these first 2 innings. 5 of the 8 hard hit balls were in these 2 innings. And then he made it through 6 innings and, in the next 4 innings, 6 of the 7 strikeouts, were in those 4 innings. He got Mike Trout twice. He allowed no base runners. And so, it really was this 2 versions of the same guy that you see in one day. And that's frustrating. And, because you want to know what flipped the switch. And by that point, the Orioles offense had gone to sleep against Reed Detmers, who, credit to him, through a great game. But you want to know what really switched with Tyler Wells. And, I think I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to try to postulate, but it's opening day. Things happen. He found his rhythm and got better. We will be fine with Tyler Wells. He's a good pitcher. I think, he's going to do well for us this year. But I was just kind of thinking through and I was like, this was very endemic of, who Tyler Wells is. It's a microcosm of Tyler Wells as a pitcher in this really interesting way, I think. So, the good thing, or, the good that came out of this is he moved through the last 4 innings with no base runners. And so that actually meant that his whip, I told you he had 5 hits in those first 2 innings, 6 innings, no walks. So that means that his whip ended below 1 for the game, which is hilarious because, we saw him for the first half of last year carrying the sub-1 whip, leading the American League. So he kept that intact. 5 base runners in the 6 innings. It's an 833 whip. That said, 8 of the 16 balls that were put in play were hit hard. League average last year was 38%. So this was obviously 50. And granted, last year, strictly hard hit rate was not really a problem for him. But what the problem was barrel rate against him. So when they hit it hard, they found that optimum launch angle and, basically got on playing with it in a way that they could really, really do damage. They being, the other players, of course. So barrel rate against him was 11.7% last year. That was in the 3rd percentile of the league. So out of any 20 guys in the league, 19 of them were better than Tyler Wells at how many barrels they gave up. So he had a 5.3 home run rate last year. The league average is around 3. That was 164% of league average. He gave up almost 2 home runs per 9 innings. And today we really saw why. To Taylor Ward, we saw this thigh-high middle-in fastball at about 92 miles an hour, and it got crushed. It went over Baltimore. So you see this very, very just imminently hittable pitch. You see it in a hittable location. You see it just kind of out of nowhere. Tyler Wells just serves up these meatballs. And this was a problem for him last year. It's why the home run rate was so high. It's why, barrel rates were so high off of him, despite him not allowing many base runners. He doesn't give up hard contact that consistently, but the quality of contact when it is made is so good against him. And that's really what's terrifying. But, I think, for me, I have this image of, who Tyler Wells is in my head. And it's this, big 6'8", physical specimen. And of course he is that, but that carries with it a connotation of him being a high stuff guy. And that's really just not who he is. He is a commandability above everything. And the stuff, quite frankly, is not that good. We talked about, I have talked about in the past him having a high spin fastball. And that's very true, but a high spin fastball at about 92 miles an hour is, moderately effective at best. And I guess to illustrate this whole point, 4 of his 5 pitches per Fangraphs and Eno Sarris's Stuff Plus grade out as below average. The changeup is significantly above average, but is the only pitch above average. It is the only pitch of his is actually above a 90, where this whole scale is normalized to 100. So 4 of his 5 pitches, purely from a stuff perspective, are 10% worse than league average or more. 3 of his 5 pitches, however, by Location Plus, evaluating given release height, all this stuff, where is the most effective place to set a given pitch. Location Plus does the same thing for Stuff Plus and just kind of evaluates, ignores kind of the trajectory that the ball takes, but takes, the initial release point and the final ending point at the plate and looks at how good is your location. So 3 of his 5 pitches are above average by location. 1 is perfectly average, 1 slightly below. So, he spots up well and he throws his pitches in effective ways, in effective locations to, maximize what he can get out of them. And this is why, largely he doesn't carry large strikeout rates, because hitters can make contact, hitters can consistently put wood on the ball. But it's just, maximizing the effectiveness and staying off of the barrel. And of course, that last part is the problem. If he loses command in the zone, he becomes extremely hittable. And, we saw that today, through the first 2 innings, again, 5 balls hit over 95 miles an hour. We saw the Taylor Ward home run, which was just, it's just such a hittable pitch, and it's difficult because we saw Taylor Ward do some damage against Grayson as well. Is in the first inning with just 1 person on, so it's not like you're in a situation where you have to give him something to hit. It's just Tyler Wells is a little bit frustrating for me personally. We talked a lot on this podcast about him and his transition to the bullpen, and I think a lot of Orioles fans generally are like, why would you want to do that when he was so effective through the first half of last year? And I think that the simplest thing in my mind is because he does not have the stuff like I just illustrated, you know, it is a moderately high spin fastball, but if you take that 92 and he can now go throw 95 to 97, high spin is much more effective at higher speeds, of course. The breaking stuff will be just as good. The off-speed stuff, like I said, his changeup by stuff plus is his best pitch. That will be just as good. And you can turn him into this high leverage reliever where I think he's much more valuable. And the chances of him getting barreled up, of him, missing spots are mitigated by the fact that this stuff, the raw quality of the pitches themselves are, I guess, augmented by the short stint and because he can put more effort into every pitch. This isn't like a knock on Tyler Wells. This was a reminder today of who he is. And the absolute, like, a reminder of how vital it is for him to be able to live on the corners, to stay out of the heart of the zone. And if he does want to use that fastball, just make sure that he keeps it up. We did see him strike out Mike Trout on a fastball high and away. The fastball can play up because of that spin, but it has to be at the top of the zone. If you're a living thigh high, middle in to these power hitters, they will take you deep all day. It doesn't matter how far we push the wall back. So, Gunnar Henderson. This is good news, of course. If anyone knows anything about this series, they know that anytime I'm going to talk about Gunnar Henderson, it's going to be good news. Gunnar went 4 for 8. 2 of those were a home run and a triple, both in the second game yesterday. He was a double away from the cycle when Brandon Hyde pulled him. We remember last year, he is not the type of person to care too much about the cycle. He could have stopped at first base and had it at a point last year, decided to leg out the double. So, I don't think the Gunner's going to be hung up on it, but us as fans, we would love to see him get a shot to hit a double. Anyway, I digress. So, 4 for 8, a home run and a triple. He added an RBI walk today. And this walk, I think, was the thing that I really wanted to talk about. So the Orioles are down 4-0 early. It's the second inning. You've got Reed Detmers, who is a really tough lefty. He really has, good stuff. This was one of the top few picks in the draft a couple years ago. And threw a no-hitter in the bigs, actually, in his first year. I can't believe I forgot that. He threw a no-hitter in the bigs. So clearly a guy with good stuff. Gunnar definitely struggled more against lefties than righties last year. He did have, somewhat significant platoon splits. Not to say he was bad against lefties. But so you've got this tough lefty on the mound. The Orioles are down 4-0. It's early in the game. You've got the bases loaded. Bases loaded with 2 outs. And you are the spark plug for this team. So there's this inherent pressure for a big hit. And I'm just kind of like setting the stage so that you and I can put ourselves mentally where you would be for him. It is a 3-2 count. You have worked the count to get yourself something hittable. You're 22 years old, so you don't, you're not supposed to have a good grasp of, life and everything that entails. And you're supposed to just kind of be chomping at the bit and aggressive. And Detmers goes ahead and throws a strike to ball breaking ball. And strike to ball just in the sense that, it started at the bottom of the zone, probably a little bit above his knees, and then dipped out of the zone. And this 22-year-old kid just spits on it. Just takes it, tosses his bat, and goes to first base. And that's how the Orioles score the first run of the game. He brings up Adley, who puts good wood on it, but, ultimately they get out of the inning with just the 1 run. But I just like the level of composure that he has as such a young kid to be able to stand in there in a tight situation, especially early in the year. Everybody is like so excited coming off these 2 big, huge victories. You're looking for the comeback win to complete the sweep at home, first season of the year. Everything is just pointing to this young kid wants to jump out of his shoes and hit something 700 feet. And just to see him not do that and, really make the correct decision. Adley came up and hit the ball very well. But just make the correct decision to not, offer at this pitch, not flail at it. I thought that was just so impressive. And then, he goes out. I actually, as a matter of fact, I think it was the next half inning. I think this play was in the third. He kind of made one, somewhat nice dropping to a knee to his backhand play. And everyone was like, oh, sweet. Gunnar can play shortstop. And then there was a ball torched into the 5.5 hole, further to his right. He lays out, diving play. I think on the broadcast, they said he's still got 83 miles an hour on the throw, which is incredible with just all of your momentum going toward the third baseline. This is all just to say, like, he is truly special. And I think the Orioles, and by proxy, all of us fans, this series was a great reminder very early on that we have one of the most dynamic players in all of Major League Baseball. And we got to cherish that, because we have had great players before. But just to see kind of the electricity from such a young age, doing it on both sides of the ball, you just have to love what Gunnar is doing. And what he did all last year, and if he keeps it up, just no reason that he should not be on some MVP ballots. That's not to say, of course, that he's going to win it. It's not going to say he's going to top. It's not to say he's going to be top 3. It is just to say he will be in the conversation, and at the absolute worst, get some down ballot votes. The guy's that talented. So I picked out a couple super small sample size numbers just because they can be fun. So Gunnar has an expected slugging percentage. I'm actually going to save that one for last because it's my favorite. Just stand by. So hard hit rate is 75%. 3 of every 4 balls he puts in play is over 95 miles an hour off the bat. That's great. His average exit velocity is 99.6 miles an hour. And yes, that means every time he puts the ball in play, he is averaging 100 miles an hour off the bat. It's outstanding. But so this is the favorite one that I just held off. His expected slugging percentage per StatCast, as recorded by Baseball Savant, expected slugging percentage is .875. And to put that in context, Barry Bonds, anytime you bring a Barry Bonds stat in, it gets fun. Barry Bonds in 2001, the year he hit 73 home runs and was walked in half of his plate appearances, to cut down the denominator of the slugging percentage. In 2001, Barry Bonds had an .863 slugging, and that was despite hitting 73 home runs. So, assuming Gunnar has lower walk rates, I guess all that this tells me is that Gunnar might have a chance to hit 80 home runs this year if he keeps this up. I kid, of course, but it's just to show you, in this first series, Gunnar was absolutely putting a pounding on the ball, and doing some serious damage. Super fun to watch. And so again, cherish the dude while he's here. I've been on the wavelength of appreciating players while we have them, because I am less scared with Mr. Rubenstein in, but I am scared that we're going to lose some of these guys, that our window will only be these 6 years. I don't know. We get attachments to players when we suffered through the terrible years that we did, and we had to, falsify these personal connections with Hanser Alberto and Rio Ruiz, and we had to actually love these guys. So I know us Oriole fans get invested. But yeah, I mean, get invested in Gunnar. The dude is as good as it gets. You have to love him. So I want to throw out a couple bullpen notes, of course. I guess the first thing I should say is, we were losing in this game and we were blowing them out in the other 2. So I don't think that there's any super high leverage, anything to work off of to start talking about how is the bullpen going to shake out in, 4 or 5 weeks. It's not really like that. Everyone who's thrown has been fine. There just haven't been these high leverage situations. So I guess I'm not saying anything all too consequential is the point. But the couple of things I did want to note, Dylan Tate, first off, it's great to see him back on a big league mound. Excuse me. He missed all of last year. It was originally a flexor strain, but rehab process was drawn out for a number of reasons. We saw, some videos circulating on Twitter of him throwing some weighted balls in October, November, and he was touching 100 with them. So everyone was like, "Oh, Dylan Tate's back," and he was back. He's thrown twice in this series. It's just great to see him back on a big league mound more than anything. That said, in the first game, he came out and he was throwing very slow. He averaged 90.4 miles an hour on the sinker. Uh, you know, Largely, I think that if that were to be the case all year, Tate has a ton of action on the sinker. There were times that he would run it up to 98, 99 miles an hour, but that was not his calling card. It was, the 1.5 feet of horizontal movement that he got on the pitch and inducing ground balls. So I guess I'm saying that to say the 90 miles an hour is not the worst thing if it were to stick around. But relative to the version of him that we were accustomed to, the one who sat 94 through 2022 and could bump up to that 98, 99 when needed, everyone, I think, just kind of raised their eyebrows and said, "Are we sure he's healthy? Are we sure that he should be on the mound right now?" And then, today he came back out. He only threw 4 pitches. It was kind of a funny inning, but he looked much better and was averaging 93 miles an hour, still had 16 inches of horizontal movement on the sinker. The thing was still dancing. I just wanted to point out, we had this concern, I think, and it will be a watch item to see if he can maintain velo consistently. What kind of routine he's in. You talk about the overuse that Yennier Cano had last year and Felix to an extent, and you want to kind of figure out what level of usage some of these guys can have. Can they throw on back-to-back days? What kind of preparation do they need? And that's, the preparation is not for us to figure out. Thankfully, that's for Dylan Tate to figure out with the Orioles. But I think it'll be an interesting thing to watch. On opening day, you should be about as fresh as it gets. And only throwing 90 miles an hour was a bit interesting. But today he got a ground ball. He then proceeded to immediately hit a guy and then immediately get another ground ball for a double play. So Dylan Tate, ground ball wizard, is back in 2022. If I remember right, his ground ball rate was just under 60%, which is very elite. So if he can, start inducing ground balls, be that reliable back end guy, if you want to, you've got runners on the corners, you want to intentionally walk someone, get a double play. Sometimes I start making up hypotheticals. If you have the runners on the corners and 1 out, do not intentionally walk someone. That's typically a very bad idea because it just puts another runner into scoring position and you already had the double play. So just ignore that and chalk it up to Eli not being great with hypotheticals. So, theoretically, if you need a double play, Dylan Tate will, hopefully be that guy that you can call on to end innings. He's never really been the strikeout guy. That's something that Tyler has talked about plenty. But we did very much rely on him. Excuse me. We did very much rely on him in 2022 to be a solid back-end guy, not allow a lot of hard contact. And so we hope that he gets back there. Seeing ground ball after ground ball today obviously is a good start. So we have not seen our closer. We haven't seen Craig Kimbrell, but we did see the other anticipated member of the back end. We did see Yennier Cano. He looked good. He got Trout swinging on a beautiful changeup, and actually had struck him out a pitch or two before. Umpire missed a call on the low outside corner with the arm side run. I think that's a tough pitch to call. I get it because it starts off the plate and comes back. But the umpire had also given us a pitch earlier in that bat, so I will chalk that up to even. And Cano beat Mike Trout with a changeup inside. This pitch averages 90 miles an hour, and this one in particular had 21 inches of arm side run. It's just unfathomable. If you ever are on Twitter, David Adler, who works for MLB and does some of the work with the motion capturing and oftentimes puts up GIFs of cool things happening via the motion capture, and you can go and you can put yourself, in the catcher's point of view, for example, or just behind the right-handed hitter, and you can see these pitches and how they dance. And it's just, that would be a really good one to do it with, because if you're standing, the pitch is going to start moving away and then just curl back and start coming directly at you standing behind the right-handed hitter. But the thing dances. That is all that I'm getting at. It is a power changeup, averaging 90 miles an hour. It's only 4 or 5 miles an hour off of the sinker that he throws. And last year we talked a lot about how comparable the horizontal movement on the sinker and the changeup was, the plane that they move on. Everything is very similar about them, just that short difference in the actual velocity makes it incredibly deceptive. The thing that I took note of, however, in Cano's outing today, he threw 6 sliders, and that was out of 20 pitches, so almost 1 in every 3. That's not a bad thing, and I want to stress that. This was just something that I noticed. So it's just interesting because, largely last year when Cano came up, I wrote it down here. So in the first month, in April, when he came up, the slider usage was 16.8%, so about 1 in every 6 pitches. But the sinker changeup combo was just so nasty as he, as he settled in, went on that incredible scoreless, hitless, runnerless, whatever streak. And the sinker changeup combo was so good that in May, they pretty much scrapped the slider altogether and only threw it 2.4% of the time. Usage then in June, jumped up to 9 and some change. In July and August, it went higher. It came back down in September a bit, but I guess this is all to say it seemed like the slider was a pitch being used out of necessity, because we saw Cano throughout the year. Arm got tired a little bit. I think it was Ben McDonald, who, obviously knows baseball well, aptly pointed out that his arm slot was moving around a little bit. The mechanics were seeming a little more inconsistent. And it seemed like the slider was something that was almost born out of that, and re-entered the pitch mix, and, was coupled with the 4-seam fastball as opposed to the sinker, because of these little changes in his mechanics, because of the fatigue. And he was starting to, just switch up the pitch mix from what people would be looking for off of him. But also, as your arm is moving around, you're going to find certain pitches are easier or more difficult to get action on. And it seemed like the slider was just working with wherever he was a bit better than the sinker and changeup were. So I guess that's all to say. I never really thought of him as somebody who was ever at any given time truly a 3-pitch guy. He was more of a 2-pitch guy with the sinker change, or once he moved around a little bit, it was more sinker slider. And so to see him come out this year and essentially treat the changeup and the slider, equally. Today they were thrown about the same amount of times. Again, this is only 20 pitches, so we can only glean so much, but I'm just saying it as something to watch throughout the year because I think it's interesting. But he treated these pitches equally, and if he does truly become a 3-pitch guy and has figured out how to get action on both of those pitches, regardless of where his arm slot is, or I guess not regardless, but given where his arm slot is, assuming he's fresh and healthy right now, then you can assume that an all-star from early last year just added a 3rd pitch to the mix. And it looked good. He threw 4 of 6 for strikes. None of them were in play. There was only one swing on it, and they missed. It was a whiff. So, but for all intents and purposes, the slider could be effective. And I think particularly because, particularly if I'm a left-handed hitter and I'm stepping in against Yennier Cano, I think there's, almost, I don't want to say comfort because he still throws 97 miles an hour, But there's a little bit of comfort in the fact that, 90% of the pitches I would expect him to throw me are going to move away from me. And so, basically, I can forget about the inside corner unless he's truly going to throw something at my front hip. I can forget about that inside corner and I can just sit and, be ready to get my hands extended when he goes for the outside part of the plate. If he can add this weapon that does have significant movement to his glove side, toward a left-handed hitter, which this slider seems to have, if he can add that, that bodes really, really well for me. I think that, yeah, I think clearly he's shown, like right-handed hitters, he can get out, moving in on them. And like I said with Grayson earlier, the right-on-right changeup, it's cool to see with Cano too. It's clearly something he's capable of. But again, just having part of an arsenal that can go either way is such a wildly effective thing, and so important in keeping hitters off balance, not allowing them to sit on one portion of the plate. So just a couple notes on the bullpen, in those two guys in particular, just interesting things more so than anything. I think Jacob Webb, Danny Coulombe, Cionel Perez did have an injury, and we, hopefully we'll see him soon. But Jacob Webb, Mike Baumann, Danny Coulombe, all of these guys were about what we expected. They looked fine in their short times, and expect them to keep getting innings throughout the year. We will stand by and sit back and wait until we're in a close enough game for Craig Kimbrell to actually make an appearance. Excited to see him also employing a new changeup. So we'll see what happens. But all in all, this was a great series for the O's. I think, we came out and immediately got the bats rolling. A lot of times I think that pitchers have a little bit of a head start earlier in the year. They're throwing all season or all off season. They weren't in the olden days. Nowadays, they are throwing all off season, refining pitches, and they're able to just, the pitchers are in control. The hitters have to react to things. And so the hitters naturally, as they see more pitches throughout the year, will start to hit them a little bit better. I think that to see the bats get hot on opening day, the day after, not so much today, but I think it's a promising sign. I think, we know that the Orioles are going to hit the ball well. We got home runs all across the lineup in this series. I think you have to feel good about where we are right now. So that's all I've got for today. As always, we encourage you to reach out to us. We're getting the Twitter going again. Have had some fun talks over there. We are at The Warehouse Pod on Twitter. You can email us, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. Follow us, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. We are over on YouTube always. We're playing with the virtual backgrounds now, so you can see me standing in front of the home plate concourse at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. We're having fun with it and appreciating, all of the engagement that we're getting at all times from all of you. Thank you as always. This has been The Warehouse Pod. My name's Elijah. Go O's.